I'm delighted to be here with you today, and I hope I can cast a light on and follow up with some of the great talks that we've already had this morning and answer some questions. Before I start, there was a question about how do you know what to test for, and I would just like to address that briefly before I get into my talk. I'm the health chair for the Labrador Retriever Club of America, and I'm also one of the directors of the club. I think as dog breeders, what you need to do is trust your parent clubs to be the source to identify what the breeders perceive to be the problems in the breed. And then you can kind of put your money where your mouth is to find out the problems that you as breeders recognize. Also, though, there is a little caveat in that, because with my breed, which has been the most popular breed for an eternity, I get all the questions from anybody in the United States. They send them to me about, my Labrador has this. I think this is a major health problem. The Labrador Club should investigate it. And a single animal may be an N of 1. So you have to gather data to see if there is any incidence. And again, I would encourage all of us, we really are horribly lacking in veterinary medicine, true incidence data on any breed. All of the incidence data comes from a compilation usually of referral institutions, which is great. It's better than no data, but does not give data on prevalence of disease in the general population. Just a little plug for, again, gathering that kind of data. And I'm going to talk a lot about OFA today, surprise, surprise. But if you go on the OFA database, we provide a free service to parent clubs where we will collect data on your health surveys for you and feed that data back to you. How easy could that be for a parent club to get information on incidence in a breed? I will tell you, my breed, again, we don't even know the average age of death of the Labrador Retriever. I can make a general assumption, and I would say somewhere around 10, with some pedigrees living longer, but we don't have hard data on incidence in anything. So get your data out and get it reported. Feel free to ask me questions at any time. Those of you who know me will know that I'm not very easily intimidated. And I also have lots of opinions, and I will tell you whether they are mine or actually the opinions of authorities. So, with that in mind, I think we will proceed. And I have to tell you one other story. I'm a grandmother, and up until recently, I've needed a lot of help doing PowerPoint. And every time they change PowerPoint, I have a learning curve. This is PowerPoint 2010. So my first PowerPoint 2010, I was so proud of myself. I worked hard, did my whole PowerPoint with no help from anyone. No one was around to brag to. So I called my 11-year-old granddaughter, and I said, India, guess what? Grandma just did a PowerPoint all by herself. And she said, great, Gram, now you're as smart as a 5th grader. You have to keep it in perspective. All right, so this is kind of who I am and what I do. Whoops, let's go back one. I'm a diplomate of the American College of Theriogenology, which is the reproduction specialty. Therio is actually a combination of human OB/GYN and urology. So we know a lot about people's private parts and animals' private parts. And it's a comparative specialty so that we're not taught just dogs or cats, we're taught across species. I am the president of the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals. Part of the reason I became so involved in hip health is my parents bred German Shepherds. And when I was quite a young girl, very young girl, my father was career Navy and was still in the Navy when they were breeding Shepherds. And to say that he was meticulous, he was a carrier pilot. My job was to clean the kennel. And that meant cleaning the kennel, scrubbing the concrete on your hands and knees. And God help you if there was anything on that concrete when my father came home. Well, for cleaning the kennel for a whole summer, I was allowed to pick a German Shepherd puppy whose name was Lance. This was prior to people doing much hip screening, and unfortunately for me, Lance was so severely dysplastic that by the time he was 4 months old, he couldn't stand. And so he, of course, needed to be euthanized. And My father and I and Lance went to the veterinarian, who was a family friend, and they euthanized him, and I called my father and this veterinarian murderers, and I said when I grew up, I was going to do what I could to help people, help little girls not have to cry because their dog was going to die. So that's how I became kind of involved in the hip deal. I'm a director of the Labrador Retriever Club, the health chair for the Labrador Retriever Club, and I am a member, and I am pleased to be that, of the AKC Health and Welfare Panel. The AKC does a tremendous amount to help support healthy dogs. I'm a breeder, owner, trainer, handler of Danik Labradors. Danik is a registered kennel name. It's a combination of my children's names, Dana and Nick. I'm also not very good at marriage. I've had a couple of those, but I knew my kids' names wouldn't change. So I am an approved AKC Retriever Hunt Test judge. I'm actually the highest point master judge in the Midwest. And this to me is one of the most thrilling things I've done. I'm the breeder, owner, trainer, handler of champion Danik Leap of Faith, who is a champion master hunter. I should have a picture. That's Bunji looking out over a duck pond. He was the 41st champion master hunter in the history of our breed. We've only had 52, and at one point we were registering 150,000 Labradors in a year. Bunji taught me a lot. He taught me that if you were fair and firm, you would get a lot of cooperation. But if you were either unfair, too firm, or not firm enough, he would tell you to take a hike and go get your own blankety-blank duck. But he was quite a guy, and he was also a master of many other skills. So health testing, what's health testing? There's many different kinds of health tests, and as veterinarians, we encourage our clients to do them. You can evaluate organ function, you can detect enzyme changes, may monitor for normal parameters. So I think one of the things that we don't always think about is in our routine or our preventive health care, those are also health tests. And they are part of making sure that the dogs that we breed are healthy. As a theriogenologist, one of the things I recommend, not to run up the vet bill, not to make people spend money they don't need to do, but to do a basic, and I mean very basic, blood screen before they consider breeding a bitch. If a bitch does not have normal kidney and liver function, and her red and white cell parameters are not normal, her chances of producing a healthy litter with no harm to her and nice healthy puppies are slim to none. And why put her and you and everybody else through that? Health testing is a form of preventive medicine, and our goal always is to keep animals healthy. Other factors of preventative medicine are genetic selection, and we've had lots of good talks about genetic selection today. Husbandry, how we house our animals, which influences a lot of our breeding behavior and a lot of other issues that we face in dogs. Veterinary care, including vaccination, are all a part of preventive medicine. Genetic disease, though, in dogs accounts for 25% of all canine disease processes. Genetic disease incidence is as frequently diagnosed in crossbred dogs as in purebred dogs. And I appreciate what we've heard before. There are a couple of good papers that actually compare the incidence of disease in purebred and crossbred dogs. And one particular paper was from the University of Missouri at Columbia, where they were particularly looking at hip dysplasia. Again, this is not unbiased data because we have a referral institution, and they were only looking at radiographs of the pelvis. And these were a whole group of dogs that came into the University of Missouri for things other than lameness. And so they were able to gather things. Take a pelvic x-ray or pelvis x-ray was part of the workup for the dog, many times for GI disease. And they found out the crossbred population in that population had as much hip dysplasia as did purebred dogs. Again, because our dog breeds today are more similar than they are different from a genetic standpoint, we don't have true we don't have hybrid vigor, and I stress that to our the students I speak to, a hybrid dog is a dog crossed with a wolf, jackal, or coyote. And when you get less inbred and more outbred, you do increase heterozygosity. That's how you get your diversity, but they are not hybrids. I want to tell you that I have spoken a number of times in foreign countries, and I actually spoke 2 years ago in England, and there was a guide dog group there that was breeding poodles to Labradors, Labradoodles, which of course Labrador people are aghast at, and I wrote the position statement for the Labrador Club on that. And they were amazed that they were still getting things like hip dysplasia. Both breeds have hip dysplasia. They were getting increased incidence of seizures. Well, both Labradors and standard poodles have seizures, and plus they picked up the tremendously gifted trait of bloat. So it was not very successful. And the leader of this organization said, I really felt that we could avoid those problems by just doing a crossbreed rather than by having a purebred dog. Now, he might have been able to accomplish that had he done some health screening in addition to selecting the way he did. Health testing then may also be used to screen for or detect genes associated with inherited animal disease, and we are fortunate now that we have a lot of good DNA tests. Health testing initiatives are often championed by breeders of purebred animals. I wouldn't say often, I would probably say always. I don't see many shelters funding health research. I don't see research groups funding health research. They have their own burdens to bear, but research into inherited or genetic disease in dogs comes from those of us who are in the fancy. You should know that when people say, or when someone says to me, well, why don't we know why that happens? There really are only two major funding sources for canine health research in the United States, and that is the Canine Health Foundation, who is astronomically influential in researching canine disease, and the Morris Animal Foundation. Now, you will see when we get further along, OFA gives you guys lots of money for health research, but we do it through a different way, and I'll explain why and how. So what's a health test? Whoops, it is a request for a new test, usually driven by a concerned population. And I'll give you an example again from the Labrador Retriever. The Labrador Retriever, as you know or may not know, is commonly but not always used for hunting. And we noted within the last 15 years that we had a population of dogs that between 1 and 2 years of age started to develop a syndrome characterized by wobbling in the rear end. And these dogs were happy and excitable and energetic and usually working and doing something fun. If that event continued, the dogs would ultimately drag their hind legs, continue to wag their tails, would be completely alert, and this rear limb paralysis would come up towards the head and in some cases would result in total collapse. All right. A cause of great concern, very frightening to the owner, certainly very distressing for the dog. So the Labrador Club was interested in finding out what that was. We thought that perhaps it was a syndrome that occurs in pigs called malignant hyperthermia, because an observation was the dogs got too hot. Well, it turns out Labradors tend to run a little warmer than some other dogs anyway, and they cool more slowly than other dogs, but that was not the cause. And in fact, with money from the Labrador Club through our Canine Health Foundation Donor Advised Fund and other sources, we discovered that Labradors can have a disease called exercise-induced collapse, which is a defect in a dynamin 1 gene. And so with 2 copies of those genes, those dogs go down, okay? Developed a genetic test. It is a recessive. You don't have to eliminate actually even your affected dogs if for some reason they were so spectacular that they were worthy of breeding and other factors, and have greatly reduced the incidence in our breed. The good thing about that disease is that most dogs could be managed. And in addition, with that test, we discovered that you needed 2 copies of the gene and a trigger, and the trigger was unique to different dogs. Now, as a breeder, I accidentally produced a couple of affected dogs, and I'll just give you an example of how diverse the triggers are. One puppy that I sold to a family in Oklahoma called me when the dog was about 13 months old, and they said if their children hit the tennis ball against the garage, the dog would get wobbly and fall down. But if the children hit the tennis ball against the house, it did not. And she was one of the first, after the test was actually discovered, we were able to prove was an EIC affected dog. So we have an argument sometimes in our community that my dog has 2 copies of the gene, the test has to be wrong. No, the test isn't wrong, you just haven't found the trigger for that dog. So an example of a population of people who encouraged researchers to find a test and then funded the test to do it. Equally important, though, new tests require validation. And I want to stress to you that there is no worse test than an invalid test. So you need to make sure that the people are doing your testing, are capable of doing it, are honest, and that the test has been validated. And one of the best mechanisms to prove that, has it been published in a peer-reviewed journal, and is it accepted by their own specialty if there is a specialty? Okay. Many of the diseases that afflict our animals are the results of polygenetic, or as we heard before, complex traits, which means we really don't get them at all, even though we look a lot. And today our tests for phenotypic tests, for polygenic tests, primarily rely on phenotypic testing for genotypic disease. So what that means is when you have a dog's pelvis radiographed, you are looking at a picture of that dog's phenotype, what it looks like. It tells you little, the radiograph itself, what its genotype is, okay? So you don't have all the information. It's a very, very good starting point. Polygenetic disease traits are decreased in frequency by selecting for normalcy in both vertical and horizontal pedigree analysis. Where are these tests performed? The OFA website lists the DNA tests currently available in the laboratories who perform these tests. And I will tell you that if you go on that website, it will tell you who does them and why and where they're recognized by. Another little aside, we had a question about cost of test. Genetic testing or health testing is expensive. But I would encourage you, rather than shopping for the cheapest place that runs any test, to support the researchers and the labs that did the research by sending your genetic tests to the lab that developed them and patented them. A long time ago, OFA was involved in a lawsuit due to a Canadian company that was infringing upon an American patent, and OFA accepting data from that company that was infringing on an American patent, okay? So the tests that you will see on the OFA website, those labs are not infringing on any patent. And I would encourage you not to support people who are infringing on patents when your research in the first place allowed these people to get their tests in line, okay? DNA tests then are the gold standard for testing, but do not exist for most conditions. In fact, in general, only for recessively inherited traits. So the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals, which I'm here to talk to you about today, functions as a voluntary diagnostic service. It is the world's largest animal health database for genetic health in dogs and cats. A lot of people don't realize we do a lot of cat work too. And for those of you who don't have purebred cats, the Maine Coon cat has an astronomical incidence of hip dysplasia, and they are typically clinical. So if you want a cat who can't jump on your counter, a Maine Coon perhaps might be a choice. The OFA databases, and here I'm talking about some of the tests where we have indirect tests, are for hip dysplasia, elbow dysplasia, patellar luxation, leg calf Perthes disease, congenital cardiac disease, thyroid, congenital deafness, sebaceous adenitis, and shoulder OCD. Let me talk to you a little bit about cardiac disease, congenital cardiac disease. Because the reason that OFA maintains that database is multiple parent clubs have said, we would like to know how we can keep track of dogs that have normal and abnormal hearts. So based on that, the OFA went to the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine, to the cardiology group, and said, we would like you to give us the criteria to help us identify congenital cardiac disease. We don't make up these guidelines, so we went to the gurus there. They came up with our existing protocol for cardiac testing. It was never intended at that point to involve acquired disease, which would be like the Cavalier's disease or really most of the cardiomyopathies. So the cardiologists themselves developed that protocol. They were the ones who suggested that as a screening test, auscultation, which is listening to the heart, was all that was necessary. And then if there were murmurs, you would go on to the next stage. So the tests are developed because there's a need. The need comes to the OFA. OFA goes to the smart guys. Okay? Likewise, the thyroid panel. We never said what test would be on it. It was the endocrinology group within the American College of Veterinary Medicine who developed the protocols. Yes?
How do we go about getting a cardiac test for acquired? Because so many of, I have equipment that have mitral valve disease. So many of the breeders go, not so many, some I know of.
Okay.
Have the dog echoed. It's determined that it was not congenital, so they get an OFA number for their heart.
Okay.
And they do have acquired.
Right. The question is, how do you get a test for acquired? Interesting that you should ask that. The cardiology group is working on that at this very moment. And one of the hard things, are there any veterinary cardiologists here? No? One of the most difficult parts about acquired is when you are relying on echocardiography, and I go to some cardiology meetings, they said if you have 3 cardiologists in a room, none of them can agree on what is a normal echocardiogram. So the standards are a little nebulous and they're working on it, but I think there will be a test. Okay. So anyway, you need to know that OFA doesn't come up with the standards. They take recommendations of others. The elbow dysplasia database was based on work from the International Elbow Working Group, which still meets every few years, and it's a screening test for elbow dysplasia. It is designed to identify normals. If anything, it is probably biased towards normal, and we all know that the OFA database, the whole database is biased towards normal. As a veterinarian, and we take lots of OFA radiographs at my clinic, I cannot tell you the selling job that I do to try to get people to submit abnormal data. A lot of people don't want to do it. I say to all of them, it is not a sexually transmitted disease. You are still a good person. Your dog is still a wonderful dog. But you really are helping the animal populace if you will share all of this information. So submit your abnormal information. And I put all of my abnormal information. I'd like to tell you, because I've been doing this a long time, I never have any dogs that have any issues. That just is not true. But if you go to Danek Lab, just type in Danek, you'll see I think there's something like 700 dogs registered in the Danek kennel name in the OFA database. It'll show you which ones were normal and which ones were not. That's how people develop reasonable breeding practices. These are some of the OFA DNA tests. DM, degenerative myelopathy. This is a test that it affects many breeds, and an example of where this test benefits older dogs who are not breeding populations is the DM test. Older German Shepherds predominantly, but several other breeds, as they age, have a hard time using their rear ends, and it is not hip dysplasia. They scuff their feet, they fall, they don't have good balance side to side. German Shepherds and these other same breeds often have a syndrome called LS segment disease, which is basically an aging change. And the treatment for this, for some dogs owned by some people, is surgery. However, it would be devastating to have a dog undergo back surgery for LS segment disease if it also has this degenerative myelopathy, because it's progressive regardless of what you do. So it saves dogs and owners a great deal of stress, etc. That disease does happen to cost $65, and I think most of these do. OFA now is also working with the Animal Health Trust in England, and the last test on this list, PLL, primary lens luxation, which is primarily a disease of terriers, is a test developed in conjunction with them. And that's also a very, very important and good test coming up for terriers that tend to develop very, very painful eyes as a result of some eye disease. The Orthopedic Foundation for Animals is a 501(c)(3). A lot of people don't realize that. It was established in 1966, and John Olin, who is a philanthropist, also the owner of Winchester Arms, who loved Labrador Retrievers and was distressed that some of them became lame, provided all of our early money. The OFA objectives are to collate and disseminate information concerning orthopedic and genetic disease, advise, encourage, and establish control programs to lower the incidence of orthopedic and genetic disease, encourage and finance research in orthopedic and genetic disease. And here I'll tell you, yes, we give lots of money, but we give our money through Canine Health Foundation and Morris. Our bylaws limit us to no more than $5,000 as an out-and-out gift to researchers, because we don't have a huge scientific advisory board. So we want to make sure we are good stewards of our money. In contrast to other 501(c)(3)s, we don't solicit money from individuals. So the monies that we give away come from any excesses that are produced in doing our diagnostic job. All right. And we do receive funds and make grants to carry out these objectives. We do ask clubs to ask what they would like to see researched. This is a slide again of my dog that I'd like to brag about. This is Champion Danik Leap of Faith, Master Hunter, and this is his chick information. As many of you may or may not be aware, OFA and the Canine Health Foundation combined to provide a central organization where people can go to get information on a particular dog and the health testing that has been done on them. A chick certificate does not imply that a dog is normal. It implies that the dog has been tested and you're willing to share the results. So if you look at this, this is my dog Bunji. His hip, where is his hip number? It should be on here somewhere. Well, he was at the very top. Okay. At the time that he was done in 1996, so he was born in 94, but in 1996 he was the 67 503rd Labrador Retriever to have OFA hip numbers done. He was OFA good. At that point, we were tattooing rather than microchip, but we do identify whether they're permanently ID'd. I decided that because some people in our breed had a concern about tricuspid valve disease, that I would have an echocardiogram done on him. Now, I will just tell you that that sounds like no big deal, but if you decide to have an echo, there are some challenges associated with that. I'm boarded. I'm adjunct faculty at the University of Minnesota, and I wanted to do all my stud dogs. I have 6 stud dogs. That doesn't mean they really get used, but potentially they could be 6 stud dogs. I called the University of Minnesota and I said, I want to get 6 echocardiograms done. And they said, well, do they have murmurs? I said, no, they don't have murmurs. Well, why do you want echocardiograms done? I want echocardiograms done because I want to be able to say their hearts look like they're normal on echoes. Well, we can't do that. So called the University of Wisconsin. Made an appointment. They said, so bring all of their medical records, et cetera, and what kind of murmur do they have? They don't have murmurs. We can't do that. Okay. Then I called Iowa, and Iowa said they probably would do it, but their cardiologist was on maternity leave at that point, and so they wouldn't be able to do it anytime in the near future. So I finally called a cardiologist, a board-certified cardiologist in private practice in Illinois. Noticed that SURF certification, which is eyes, is every year, and he was SURF certified up until the year that he died. I also did patellas because Labradors do patellas. So all of this information is on here, and it allows someone who wanted to breed to this dog to know what he was all about. And there he is, and that's his picture just showing up there with Chick. Again, it's information sharing. And through the OFA website, if you click on your dog, you as breeders, what's a breeder? You're someone who breeds dogs, according to the dictionary, and dog breeds developed through selective breeding. We've heard this today a lot, based on purpose with structure associated as needed. I love this picture. Wayne Reiser was one of the first guys to research hip dysplasia. The dog has varied biologic makeup and its relationship to orthopedic disease. This is the natural dog. This is the pariah dog, and he is the biologically perfect survival organism. I think most of us would. Are there any Canine dog people in here? Looks okay, quite a bit like a Canine, doesn't it? Not what I would want my Labradors to look like, certainly, but this dog has erect ears. This one happens to be cream colored. He's has longer legs, shallower body. He's built to be a very efficient hunting machine. As we get further, and this is a dog I took a picture of, couldn't figure out how to copy it very well, that I took a picture of when Dr. Lawrence and I were lecturing at the vet school in St. Kitts. There are millions of these street dogs there. They're very biologically efficient. They all have similar, quote, breed type, if one would call it that. They're angular, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the dogs, though, in our country are bred by uneducated and casual backyard breeders. If you look at population genetics, most of our dogs are not deliberately bred. This is where our issues come from. People decide, you have a golden, I have a golden, let's have a litter of puppies, let's sell them. Or there's no supervision whatsoever. Who knows what jumped the fence? Most of our dogs in the U.S. are not bred by people that are here today. This is my pug. This is Hobo. Hobo is an example of a street-bred pug. I love this little dog. He's kind of a disaster. I mean, I bought him at basically a flea market, something I would tell all of you never to do. And I bought him on a 4th of July where he was sitting in a pen and it was 110 degrees on a corner. And we drove by and there was a sign, Pug Puppies. And I said, oh, Pug Puppies. And John said, do you want to look at him? I said, no, keep driving. We went to the next exit and came back. And I said, I just can't stand it. I have to buy one. So I wrote my check. His quote, his papers were going to be in the mail, Margaret. What can you do about that? He's a charming, charming little dog. He was obviously not selectively bred. Fortunately, my significant other is an orthopedic veterinary surgeon who was able to repair his patellas. He used to breathe pretty well, but as he's gotten older, his respiration is a little compromised, but probably his biggest issue, his bite is so terrible that he actually experienced a fractured mandible due to the way his teeth kind of cave in. I mean, long, complicated story. Anyway, I adore him. He's neutered. He's a pug. We don't select for what he looks like. But if you wanted to have that kind of face, this is one of my Labrador puppies, quite a bit healthier puppy. He grew up to be a champion, and several of his litter mates are service dogs. I think there were no geniuses in that litter, so there weren't any Achas. Okay, but when we select our dogs for non-erect ears, etc., we're selecting for the puppy-like looks. And we heard about talking about wanting dogs to remain to look like puppies. We've done a lot in our selection parameters that have been good, that have been bad, and that have been unconscious. And so in our breeding selection, we need to be aware that when you select for or against a trait, that there are going to be other traits that follow along. This is a German Shepherd puppy that actually people were hoping his ears would come up, and they did. The OFA website, OFFA.org, is your most complete source of information. Any person can click in any dog's registered name or number and find out what health clearances are on file. And I will make a bold statement for the OFA and for all of you. If the information is not on the website, one of two things happened. It was not submitted or it did not pass. And a dead giveaway that an animal does not have a clearance if it has one of the health tests that your parent club recommends and the others aren't listed. That is a dead giveaway. The dog did not pass. No one in the Labrador breed puts elbows on only. It means the hips failed. No one puts hips on and not elbows if the elbows were normal. So it doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater, but get all the information. If you click on vertical pedigree, you can get the information on the sires, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and all of the sibling information. So it's a huge tool. How do I use that? If I'm trying to decide between two stud dogs personally myself, I'll do a vertical pedigree and try to look for what I'm doing so that I can help select away from health traits. And above all, I think about what your breeding decisions mean to the dog and their dogness. And I say this I say this sincerely. No dog really cares what color it is, okay? And so while parent clubs get all wrapped up in color, and certainly my club, our field trialers roll over if a dog has 4 white hairs on its chest. Even though our standard says you can't. The field trialers, I mean, that is the kiss of death. You cannot sell a trial dog with any white on it. Doesn't bother the dog at all. The dog cares if it can't breathe, if it can't eat, if it can't get from point A to point B, etc. Think about what your breeding decisions mean to the dog itself. All right, that's the end of my slideshow. Questions from any of you?